process of scrubbing our messaging and position today. We're a typical 9-year-old company, right? And I equated to a 9-year-old kid. I'm going to talk about me. Then I'm going to tell you about my friends, i.e. testimonials. And then if we've got time, I'm going to learn a little bit about you. We've got to start with the first line manager because that's where the rubber meets the road. I don't care how good our enablement programs are. If they don't own the adoption, the execution, and the positive modeling of it, it's not going to happen.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Roderick Jefferson. And Roderick's the Vice President of Field Enablement at Netskope. And he's the author of a new book titled Sales Enablement 3.0, The Blueprint to Sales Enablement Excellence. And that's what we talk about in our conversation today. Roderick shares tips and best practices from his book and from his experiences in the field that outline what's required to become an effective sales enablement practitioner. We also dive into what the ultimate purpose of sales enablement is, which Roderick breaks down to say it's really just to partner with sales leaders to build and execute on strategies that achieve two main goals: decreasing ramp time and increasing productivity, all of which lead to increased revenue. And we dig into why Roderick believes that if your sales enablement team is still enabling sellers to focus on selling products, selling services, or even solutions, then you are doing them, your company, and your prospects a real disservice. You will listen to all of this. So stick around, all this and much, much more. But before we get to Roderick, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And we certainly appreciate if you could leave us a review, give us some feedback about how we're doing. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Roderick, welcome to the show.
Andy, thanks for having me. I'm honored.
Oh, pleasure's all mine to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So first, I always start this way. First and foremost, sales guy. And I think that's important to throw out there because I've walked in shoes, right? I'm not the typical trainer that throws out theory. I'm an actual practitioner and have been. So I started out as a BDR and got promoted to AE, did really well, went to President's Club a couple of times, got promoted to sales leader and actually turned it down, oddly enough. Because I realized, I know it sounds crazy, I realized I loved the process of selling more than I did taking down big deals. And so what I did was talk myself into my first training job. I said, what if I could take my basic rudimentary templates and spread that out? I could get people ramped up faster. I could get more people to President's Club. And what VP of sales is going to say no to that? So he said, if you can do that, then you've got a new job. So I walked into my first training job at AT&T, a long time ago. And from there, I have run sales training, sales productivity, effectiveness, et cetera. And oddly enough, I am the person that coined the phrase sales enablement.
Really?
Years ago. Yeah. And my baby has taken off and gone a direction that I had absolutely no idea it was going to go. I've been blessed over the years. I've run enablement at Siebel Systems, Network Appliance, eBay, HP, Oracle, Salesforce, and Marketo. Then I started to feel as though I couldn't look myself in the face and call myself a practitioner. I'd gotten so ivory towered. So I went and, I know, another glutton for punishment, went and consulted for 3 years and got my fingernails dirty again and rolled up my sleeves. And now I'm the VP of Field Enablement at Netskope, a cybersecurity company. So it's been a phenomenal run so far.
Yeah, I'd heard of a few of those companies you rattled off there.
They're going to be big one day. They're going to catch on.
Some of them are going to catch on. I think some have potential. Yeah. Interesting. So, do I owe you a royalty on this show every time we air? Because
I was not smart enough to trademark sales enablement in hindsight.
Yeah, well, that could have been interesting. Well, so let's dig into that a little bit. So why'd you come up with the term? What was the inspiration for that?
I was actually in a meeting with my VP of sales back in 2004 with NetApp. And I was actually being smartass, oddly enough. I know, shocking, hard to fathom, right? So we're talking, he says, no, we can't handle discovery and qualification very well. Throw training at it, right? We are having problem with objection handling, so we're discounting too deeply. Throw training at it. Our senior leaders are managers and not leaders. Throw training at it. And I said, I think you train animals and you enable people. We're not teaching people to sit or roll over. We want this to be a long-standing ongoing occurrence rather than a single event. And from that light bulb moment came the inception of sales enablement.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I love that statement. I use a slightly different version, which is, you train animals, you educate people, but enable works just as well. So,
Alrighty.
But I think it speaks to a mindset and a perspective that I think is still not widely held enough about how do we enable people to perform it at a higher level. Because the point you just made is everybody spots a problem. You make this point in the book as well. Is you spot a problem, you throw training at it, so reflexively.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't require a ton of thought to do that. And so you still have training as being sort of this disconnected series of episodes or moments, as opposed to part of a coherent plan for, hey, how are we going to help people get better?
Absolutely. And I don't want to knock training. So I don't need the trainers sending me information over on social media. I'm not saying that I don't believe in training, because I do. I think it's a component of, to your point, a component of enablement. But it's just one component. And enablement, I think the reason that it hasn't gained the traction that I believe it is beginning to gain now is because it means something different everywhere. You ask 10 people, as I said in the book, what enablement is, you'll get probably 10 answers.
Sure.
None of those would be wrong, but none of them would be complete either. And I think it comes down to where you are in the maturation cycle of your company. If you are a rocket ship and you're growing exponentially, what's it going to be? Onboarding and training is where you're going to focus, right? Then when you get into that mid-range where you get more of a big ticket sale, it shifts again, because now I've got to focus on a different type of seller, a different IEP, if you will, ideal employee profile, because we don't have enough acronyms in the world. Right. But then when you get to that latter stage where you're the large enterprise company, now it's that long-term relationship sale. And each one of those requires a different level of enablement and a different type of enablement as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's sort of horses for courses, right? And you hire a different set of people. To your point, you hire different people at different stages of the company, because and I think this is something that sort of aligns with that, but is not integrated fully enough, I think, into sort of the hiring ethos, which is that, I mean, there are people who are, startup people, there are people who are scale up people, and there are people who are established people.
Absolutely.
And how we enable them changes, but I don't think there's enough work going into sort of distinguishing between who those people are and hiring the right people at the right point in time.
Agreed. And that's where we could really use some work. And that's where I think enablement really comes in and becomes an integral part of, one, the go-to-market strategy for a company to differentiate us from the old view of being the fixers of broken things and broken people. And also an opportunity to, and I always give an analogy of an orchestra when I think about enablement. When people say, what sells enablement to you right now, as opposed to when the phrase was conceived. Now it's, you think about an orchestra, you've got woodwind, strings, percussion, brass, all trying to play the same song. Sometimes they're out of tune, they're out of phase, they're playing on top of each other. Well, let's align that to business. The same thing happens. You've got marketing, product management, engineering, HR, sales, all trying to do the right thing. But the problem is there's a lack of coordination, collaboration, and orchestration, if you will, until in both cases, one person or one organization, which I believe is enablement, steps up, taps the stand, and now all of that noise and chaos becomes a beautiful sheet of music. That's what we do in our essence.
Right. Now, that description you just gave, though, is there are people that say, well, that sounds like revenue operations.
I love that we're going here. That could be rev ops, could be rev strategy, could be, in my case, it's field enablement. It really comes down to what's your remit, right? When I think about rev ops and rev enablement, I look at it from the perspective of everything in the buyer's journey, inclusive of things like sales operations and even marketing operations all coming together.
Right.
In my case, I own field enablement today, and that is all enablement other than customer education. So I don't have the ops and the mops functions under me. They sit as peers to me. And I think, to me, that's where I make that distinguishment between the field enablement and then the rev ops piece, or the rev enablement, and the whole even revenue strategy, talking about the customer journey end to end. Then you've got all the M&A due diligence pieces that come into play. You've got the market expansion piece that comes. You've, of course, got the sales and services and support and all the enablement pieces. But I think it all comes down to being the voice of the customer at the end of the day.
For enablement.
Absolutely. For enablement. Certainly. And being that hub that spokes out to every part of the organization to make sure, again, back to the orchestra analogy, that we're all playing the same tune, the same time, the right way on behalf of the customer, and left hand knows what right hand's doing.
All right. So let me ask you a question about that then. So, and I think that's great. And I think that's where we should be. But I was just having a conversation with someone earlier today on recording another episode, talking about how we still have this great gap, let's say, that exists between the way most sales organizations sort of view the buyers and the journey the buyers are on versus the way they view the sales process, right? That there's this very no alignment, let's say, between the selling process and the buying journey.
Strong disconnect is what I see out there.
Right. And so is that enablement's role to try to narrow that gap?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about it, the reason that over the years I've seen that disconnect is, I want to say simple, but it's simply complex.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you can define it simply. The solution is harder. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the most part, I've seen it because companies have tried to take the buyers and shoehorn them into their sales process, their sales methodology, their sales stages. Let's just call it their selling motions.
Right.
As opposed to starting up high with the buyer's journey, figuring out what it is that they need and how they purchase and what they're going to purchase, and then waterfalling down and adjusting your selling process to the buyer's journey. When you do that and everything starts and ends with the customer or the prospect, the whole world shifts. So to answer your question, what's enablement's role in that? It's, again, to align those. Right now, we're rolling out a new sales process and new sales methodology. That's not coming from ops, not coming from sales. It is coming from enablement that is pulling all of those pieces together that say sales, SE, customer experience, product marketing, product management. Everybody come to the table at the same time and let's talk this thing through so that we don't have any misunderstandings or any explanations 5, 6, 8 different times. When you do that, then you get that alignment and that the eyes are squarely on the buyer and the buyer's journey as opposed to what we're doing internally.
Yeah.
It's not utopia, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to try to pretend that it's unicorns and rainbows, because it's not. It is very, very painful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the example I oftentimes give on the program is I love that classic Gartner chart from a few years ago on buyer enablement. They, I'm sure you've seen it. They call it their spaghetti diagram. They diagram the buyer's journey. It's this complex, dense process with starts and stops and restarts and so on. And at core, there's sort of 4 jobs they've identified that buyers accomplish during their buyer journey. And I looked at that and thought, well, this is what I've experienced over decades of selling. You've got it. You've nailed it. But I've never spoken to a person subsequent to that who's in a sales leadership position that says, yeah, we've modified our sales motion to align with what the buyers actually do.
Well, I can say that you have now walked in and met one, not myself, but what we did internally was we decided we're going to start there because that's what made most sense. And by not starting there, now we look at how the funnel changes and why the sales stage and the selling process is so long is because we go in, we give our explanation, we do our due diligence and our discovery, we come back, and then we go back and talk to them and they go, yeah, that's what you heard, but that's not what I said. So now if we take the steps of the buying process and flip it on its head and say, now discovery and qualification is about asking more questions and less about trying to be the smart person in the room. Find out what's going on, where that pain is coming from, and if it's pain. Because it could be, and that's, I think, another problem is we're always looking for trying to create this compelling event or pain. It's not always pain, though, Andy. Sometimes it's increased productivity and efficiency. Sometimes it is decreased pain. But you'll only get that by asking questions in the disco and qual process versus assuming or asking questions so that you can move the sale forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I can get on my soapbox about why I think you should never ask about pain points, because I don't think buyers think in terms of pain points.
They don't.
They think
or
about
products or solutions or platforms.
Yeah, they think about desired outcomes.
I've got a problem that I need solved.
Yeah. So yeah, no, totally aligned there. Yeah, I sort of look. Yeah, I love to simplify complex things, and yeah, I look at. And I think if you read literature about decision making and so on, you see that buyers basically go through 3 stages, and it sort of tracks to what Gartner put in the report. Is they put 4, I think it's 3, but whatever. It's buyers first identify what the problem is and what desired outcomes they want. They then go through a how stage about how we can achieve these things. And the third order decision is who we're going to do it with.
Agreed.
And yet most sellers come to the game in the first call. It's like they assume that, hey, I'm the answer.
Which is,
and this whole idea
as we both know, the wrong way to go these days.
Right. And I think that what stage and the how stage, these first 2 stages are really, to your point, it's not about products and platforms. This is a battle of ideas. And if you don't have ideas, if you don't have questions that stimulate ideas and so on, yeah, increasingly you're going to be on the outside looking in, because if this is facts and figures and stuff like that, buyer gets that from online. They don't need you for that.
No, and they've got more access to content now than ever before. When I was selling, I wish I would have had the kind of the access to information. I think the big shift that I'm starting to see, and that we have to continue to push, and I'm right here as an evangelist for it, and that is, we've got to get our sellers to start having conversations and stop giving presentations.
Absolutely.
And what I mean is, you throw up the whole deck and you go, oh, we're going to skip slide 6, which means in essence, I don't know how to position it, so I'm never coming back to it. As opposed to that, what if we could get folks to really start getting into true storytelling, talking about it from a references and testimonial position, the ability to whiteboard so then it intrinsically becomes a conversation versus just throwing slides up so that I can see if, it's the whole spaghetti on the wall. Whatever sticks, that's the part I'm going to dive into because that's what's important to you. Get away from all the nonsense and just ask people questions. And I think there's one critical question that I see get left out a lot. And the true sellers ask this question. And that is, we always find out everything about the company, right? We do our due diligence. We find out what's going on, where you're going, who's my competition. The one question that gets left out is this one. So, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, by doing business with my company, what will that mean for you personally? Will it get them a bigger seat at the table? Will it get them a promotion? Will it get them out of the doghouse? But if you leave that piece out, you're only getting 50% of the answer. And talk about building a champion. Can you think of a better question than that one?
No, I think, well, maybe, but I think that's a great question. Actually, I was just presenting earlier today at an online summit about discovery, and that question was included in there. To me, that's in my new book that's coming out in February. Mm-hmm. I define 6 sort of key discovery questions or category of questions, but yeah, the one you talked about is right in there. So yeah, you need to have ask the question that enables the buyer to quantify the impact of change on the organization, on the team that they're part of, and on them personally. And if you don't take it, to your point, if you don't take it down to the personal level, then yeah, you don't fully understand what you're dealing with, the situation.
And you will always be viewed as a vendor.
Yeah.
That's just here to sell me something, as opposed to this person actually took time to find out and personalize this for me and include me in this piece, but not only from an inclusive perspective, but how can this person help me reach another goal, not just the company sell more, fill in the blank.
Right. Exactly. Again, part of this simplification thing that you like and I like and so on is for me, I think we have to start by reorienting the mindset of sellers. So they understand their job differently. And so if you ask most sellers, I've done this when I give talks, and tell me what your job is as a seller, right? And throw up answers here on the stage, we'll take them. And invariably, it goes around persuading somebody to buy your product or service, and variations of that. And I think when people have that mindset, is they're going to embark down a certain path of actions that are sort of these prototypical salesy actions, right?
And we wonder why people don't like sales.
And then people don't like sales. Well, they don't like sales because this is the way sellers act.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this isn't innate human behavior. This is learned behavior.
Oh, it's learned. Absolutely.
So this is on us as a profession and so on. So before we dig into that, I think just what's really critical is to say, okay, we need to change the mindset that people have. They're understanding what their job is. And so I believe that selling is nothing more, I'll give you my short version here, nothing more than listening to understand what is the most important thing to the buyer and then helping them get that.
Absolutely. It's our job. About being able to help, not sell. And then in that piece, Andy, comes time to call in and call out, which I think is equally, if not more important.
Oh, sure. That's part of it. Because if you understand what the most important thing is, you'll know whether you're a fit or not. And you'll know whether it makes sense for them to invest their time and attention in you, and for you to invest your time and attention in them. But it's this mindset that says, look, I'm here to understand, really understand what's the most important thing to you and help you get it. Well, that's a whole different attitude than saying it's my job to persuade you to buy my product.
Yeah. When I was in sales, I would always tell people, I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here to help understand if there's a match between what you need and what we can provide. If not, if I can help you find even that match, I was open to that. And I think there's a lot of folks that get nervous about them saying, we're not the right fill in the blank, but you know what? So-and-so might be for you. Mm-hmm. There's a huge level of credibility in that. And I actually closed sales later by telling prospects that we weren't the fit. But when there was a time for a fit, they remembered this person came to help me. They didn't try to shoehorn me into something that I didn't need.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very powerful thing to do. You build a lot of credibility, develop a lot of trust with people. Do that, they very well may come back to you on that. But so, I think when you take this very simple view of what it is you're trying to do, then it's like, okay, what are the behaviors we need in order to do that, right? In order to help the buyers. And it's those behaviors aren't, pitching, showing up, throwing up all the sort of things that we know that I like to lump into the category of salesy, because salesy has no value for the buyer.
None.
It has no value for you as a seller. And so we were talking about enablement. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just like, to me, this is the big challenge for enablement is we just need to stop this behavior. It's like, I think companies need to say, look, we're going to go scrub our training, and anything that smacks of this, like I said, stereotypically salesy behavior, we're just not going to put out there anymore.
We're in the process of scrubbing our messaging and position today. We're a typical 9-year-old company, right? And I equate it to a 9-year-old kid. I'm going to talk about me. Then I'm going to tell you about my friends, i.e. testimonials, right? And then if we've got time, I'm going to learn a little bit about you.
Right.
Well, I think there's 3 ways where we could change that mindset. The first is we've got to start with the first line manager, because that's where the rubber meets the road. I don't care how good our enablement programs are. If they don't own the adoption, the execution, and the positive modeling of it, it's not going to happen. So infuse them into every one of your enablement programs that's being built. Don't try and build it and then take it to them. They're going to poo-poo it right away. The second thing is, I believe, and I do this in my teams, I will not hire anyone on my enablement team that has not carried a bag in some sort, because there's no credibility. I'm hiring a theorist or just a pure trainer. I need someone that can talk about how painful those shoes are that they're walking in, or how comfortable they are with credibility. Mm-hmm. And I think the third thing is enablement, especially the enablement leader, should be a part of the interview process for a couple of reasons. One is because we're looking at whether or not they have the propensity to fulfill the programs that we've got in place or that are growing. Secondly, I think we're looking at more than just can they hit the number and what does it take to do that? And we get a bit more of a cultural touch. And then third, it's because we've got an even higher BS filter than sales leaders because we have to deal with them.
Well, let's talk about sales leaders though, because I agree with you 100%. I think that my belief is, and based on all the data I've seen and people I've talked to, is that we dramatically underinvest in enabling frontline leadership. And we put these poor people in positions where, they get promoted, they get very little training in general, unless they're working for some larger enterprises, more mature enterprises, but even then, still not as much. And I like to serve throughout the serve. It's not meant to be a serious question, though. It could be is say, look, okay, LinkedIn sales, state of sales. I think so. We spend $15 billion a year on sales training in the United States. ASTD, I think I said it was 20 billion, of which I would wager maybe 10% is spent on enabling managers.
Maybe 10.
Right. And I ask people, I say, so, okay, what if we flipped that percentage? What if we spent 90% of our sales training dollars on enabling management and leadership at all levels, not just frontline, but all levels, and 10% on the sellers? What do we think would happen to sales?
I think it would change drastically because, to your point, what we do today is we take a rock star salesperson and we throw them into a sales manager role, but we never teach them how to actually be a leader. So we've created two problems here. One, you've got a patch that's uncovered that was covered by a rock star. So now it's susceptible to all of your competition. And secondly, you've got someone who's never interviewed, never run a team meeting, never had a difficult conversation, and they're going to try and micromanage their team, which I've never heard micromanage used in a positive light, Andy. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Right? But they're trying to micromanage their team the same way they did their patch. So to your point, what if we invested in, the high potential programs of getting people in stages in a succession plan before we just threw them out to the wolves, right? Have them manage a small patch, have them manage a small team, and then progress them up. I know that's not always possible in every company, but if you did have a hypo program, at least they would get the practical application and experience of the small things that differentiates you between being a manager and a leader. And I think that's the important part we really should be focusing on.
Yeah.
Right? And what would come out of that, to answer your question? We would have a relationship, we being enablement and all the other groups would have a relationship with someone with a bit more empathy and a bit more open eyes and maybe even open minds to communication, collaboration, and deeper orchestration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel, I was in that position. Not to say I felt bad for myself, but yeah, I at least at the time when I had my first sales management job, I got promoted after 21 months, I think, in my first job to a sales manager, had close to a dozen people under my charge, most of whom were older than I was.
Which it creates a whole other level of problems.
Right. And I was just remember thinking to myself, it's like, yeah, I'm excited about this, but what do I have to offer the guy who's been in the field for 20 years and is doing a perfectly fine job most of the time? He just don't want to be a manager, right? And we don't, it's not just leadership skills and so on, but it is like performance improvement. For instance, to me, that's a skill. People need to understand how you work with someone to improve their performance. It's just sort of a generic sense, not necessarily in sales. We could take a lot of lessons from
and how do you individualize that instead of
how do you individualize it, right? But we don't provide those tools to managers. And then when sellers, a large fraction of sellers aren't hitting quota, a manager gets nuked. Some sellers get nuked, but it's like, we didn't give them the tools they needed. These aren't, and it just sort of drives me nuts. It's like, okay, I'd rather invest way more in the management right now, because if you ask sellers where they learn how to sell, which I've done in the past, is, managers and peers
Well,
turn out to
what's
be
important to
the
your
top.
manager is imperative to you, right? So if
Well,
this
but
is
it's
what
just
got
who do
them
you
to
learn
that
the lessons
role,
from?
that's what I'm
Who's
going to do
influential?
every day. And what if we stopped assuming that every rock star salesperson wanted to be a sales manager?
Well,
What if they wanted to come over to the enable side of the house, or they wanted to go look at SE or PMM or wherever it is? But we just assume that you've got a one track that points you directly to sales leadership, and that also every single salesperson is not necessarily coin operated. This may be a stepping stone for them they were really good at, but they have something else in line and in mind inside the company. But rarely does that actually get asked. We just assume, oh, they're killing it. Let's move them up to sales manager. And I think
yeah.
that's why a part of why we have so many poor sales managers. Some people just aren't built. I think, and I know it sounds crazy, I look at sales management kind of the same way that I do college and marriage. Great
Okay.
institution, but not meant for everybody.
Yeah, or sometimes, you need a practice spouse before you get to the.
Exactly. You need the starter wife. I don't know.
But I agree. I mean, have known lots of people in my career who jumped to management and then opted out and said, I just want to be an individual contributor. And we're happier being that, and have, in some cases, have grown to be very senior individual contributors with, huge contribution that they make, and they carry a title, but they're just an individual contributor. And I think,
and in some cases, far more lucrative without all the headaches of having to drive an entire team's performance.
But they work for companies that are flexible to say, well, look, we want to keep this person. So how do we keep this person, keep them motivated, keep them happy, keep them, finding fulfillment in what they're doing? Mm-hmm. And some of it comes with, they take on more accounts, more important accounts, larger accounts, maybe a title, some pay, maybe a lot of pay. I mean, there's ways to do it as companies, be more creative to be able to keep your people. And I think to your point you made as far as we need to be able to, as leaders need to be able to coach these people to say, let's really take a look at what you want to do in your career. And is this really the right fit?
Absolutely. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes we have to really look at what's important for the employee, not just the company.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes people have to take the leap and try it before they find out that, hey, it's not the right thing for them. And
that's what I always tell people. That's why I always tell people that I mentor. Never allow anyone else other than you to drive your career. Not your boss, not your CEO, not senior leadership team, because they don't have the vested interest in it, and they don't have to go to work every day. They may be in what in my book I call my candy bar job, right? Mm-hmm, and that's I was only paid in my favorite candy bar. Would I still do this job? For them, the answer may be yes. For the individual or the manager or the leader, that may not be a distinctive yes. So you've got to figure out what's that candy bar job and how do I make strides every day to get one step closer to it, whatever it may be.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that, and I believe strongly in this, that one bad trend in sales over the past 20 years has been to remove some of the autonomy away from sellers in favor of greater compliance to processes and metrics, and not enabling people, the environment, to become the best version of themselves. I think that's I think that's the motivation for most people is how do we become better at what I'm doing? And if they have a path to doing that, and they're getting paid and life is good and they're finding fulfillment and sometimes even joy in what they're doing, that might be less pressed to say, I need to get promoted.
Absolutely. And as an enablement leader, that statement you just made, Andy, is why I'm not a big fan of playbooks. I think it is too constrictive.
Right.
What I enjoy is putting a framework in place, which still gives the seller an autonomy and some flexibility. But when you put a playbook in, it's you have to follow these steps sequentially and do it this way. And it has to be dark blue. I didn't say royal or light blue. It's dark blue, right? But when you put the framework in, you just go in and say, same analogy, it's blue. Right. Within this framework, it's blue. You determine, is it royal? Is it navy? Is it Carolina blue? Whatever it is. But stay within parameters and keep them on the rails. But you don't have to be so directive all the time.
Well, and I think that this, it's sort of a complex topic we could dive into in depth, but is oftentimes, managers operate these from a position of fear, right? They're afraid
Absolutely.
to do something that's not the same as what's always been done, or peers are doing in other companies. And we know, we can talk about the cultures that forced this to happen. But yeah, as individuals, to a point you made before, is no one really cares about you but you at the end of the day. And you have to make the decisions that are right for you. And in some cases, and I look at my own career, I was not prototypical candidate for success in sales, but I determined pretty early that the only way I was going to be able to stay in sales was to do things that aligned with who I was as a person, and to act in a way that aligned with who I was as a person. So it wasn't the same as everybody else. It was, we were given frameworks. We didn't have playbooks. And I had bosses that were tolerant of me sort of doing my own thing my own way, but I delivered. And I was willing to take that on, the additional accountability. And, they're prepared to give it to me. And I think more sellers need to, push back a little bit and say, hey, I think there's a better way to achieve the same end. Give me some more rope, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that.
Yeah, and I think in the right companies and the right cultures that can happen. And I learned early in my career from a great mentor. Look, the company is here to make a profit, not friends. Friends are optional, right? And so with that in mind, to your point, you have got to drive where you're going.
Yes.
And the thing I love about sales is it cannot be a more simplistic role on the planet. There's the Mendoza line. You're either above it and you hit quota, or you're below it and you didn't. There's no kind of, sorta, I kind of hit it. No, you either did or you didn't. But at the end of the day, I've sat in president's clubs with people that I know didn't necessarily, quote unquote, follow the process and killed it, right?
Sure.
And then you've got other people that followed it and made it. And then you've got people that went completely contrary to it and still made it as well. And so you look at that collectively, especially as an enablement leader. And I always thought it wasn't a matter of a box they're inside or they're outside of it. I wanted to talk to all three of those types and find out what were the best practices of all of them that then I could infuse into that framework.
Yeah.
And now you're hitting you've got the different learning styles. Now you've got all the different types of sellers. And when you get that individual that falls into one of those categories, you now know how to address them and also how to motivate them differently than the folks in the other two categories.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's I think this desire to have sales be so cookie cutter, both in terms of the people doing the work as well as the people you're selling to, is one of the great delusions. And we wonder why win rates are low and so few reps and percentage are hitting numbers. It's part of that mindset that's enabling that, unfortunately. So,
and you can have consistency without it being cookie cutter. There is still a space inside of consistency for autonomy and for flexibility.
Yeah. Well, and I think to point you made before, though, is you distinguish between managers and leaders. I call it between leaders and bosses. And we got lots of bosses. We don't have enough leaders. We've got too many bosses because we're not helping them understand what it takes to become a leader, to the point you made earlier. And I think that's...
And the person that groomed them didn't know what it took to be a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it keeps propagating over and over.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's going to be a topic we'll have to delve into at a future conversation. And I don't think we even really ended up talking about your book, but we can have you come back and we can do that.
Oh, the whole time we've been talking about the book. Everything that we've talked about in this conversation is in my book, Sales Enablement 3.0.
All right. Sales Enablement 3.0 by Roderick Jefferson. I presume available wherever books are sold.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Roderick, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And I look forward to doing it again.
Likewise. Looking forward to it.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I am so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Roderick Jefferson, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.